We've been living in our small 500 square foot home for almost 5 years now. The house is small and not much to look at. In fact, it's usually mistaken for a garage when compared to the neighbors' houses. My wife and I are a pretty normal couple. We enjoy video games, comic books, and really most forms of nerd culture. I should start off by saying that I'm intrigued with the supernatural, but was by no means a believer. I guess the event started soon after we moved in, but probably went unnoticed due to our own hubris. My wife doesn't like to be scared, and doesn't really enjoy practical jokes, so when she brought up the fact that she thought our home might be haunted, I took her seriously, but with a grain of salt. I'll first post the events that have happened to me personally, or us together, and if there's enough interest in my story, I'll update with events that happened to her. The first event of the three I'm going to share happened late one night, after my wife headed off to bed. It was getting late, but I was really engaged in the video game I was playing, so I decided to stay up and play for a while. At first, everything was fine, but every once in a while I thought I heard something coming from the kitchen. The kitchen is right to the left, and you can see right into it from the couch I was sitting on, so any noise is easy to hear. The noise was like a jingling. It was a similar sound to my dog's collars when they walk around or play. As I said, you can easily see into the kitchen, and each time I looked expecting to see one of my dogs, I was met with still shadows and stone silence. My dogs go to bed with us and sleep in our room. However, if my wife goes to bed before me, the dogs go with her, without exception. So to see one of them would have been strange in its own way. The jingling continued to gesture itself for a few more minutes, which resulted in me pausing my game to get a better listen. The sound this time didn't stop. I stood up, and like that old cliché, decided to investigate. The kitchen proved quiet and uneventful. I walked to the edge of the stairs that lead down to our bedroom to make sure one of the dogs wasn't sitting at the bottom of them, but again was met with nothing. I chalked the noise up to just something outside and went back to the game, this time only half into it, as my spidey sense was definitely tingling. The sound had just seemed to stop, and I had gradually re-immersed myself into my game, when something caught my attention. One of my dog's tennis balls was very slowly rolling across the carpet, just in front of my feet. That might not seem strange, but I mean very slowly, like it was being pushed by something. I, of course, did a double take, making sure I was actually seeing this. But once I stared at the ball, it stopped completely. It must have rolled about 10 feet because I remember seeing the ball a few minutes earlier on the other side of the room, where my dog, Daisy, usually leaves it. At this point, I decided I was tired and headed off to bed myself. That night, while trying to doze off, I could have sworn I heard noises coming from the living room. As I mentioned, our bedroom is in the basement, and the living room is right above it, so any sound or footsteps are not easily dismissed as old house sounds. And this sounded like footsteps. I was just going to forget it and try to sleep through it when my wife woke up and asked, "What the fuck is that sound?" It was clearly something because it woke her. We both headed back upstairs for another investigation, again to find all of the upstairs lights were on, even lamps we never turned on. All of them. It was meshed right up. This still gives me the chills thinking about it. We turned them off, dodging each other's confused glances, and emptily reassuring ourselves that there had to be an explanation. I don't think either one of us really knew what to say. And that's not the only time this has happened. Well, that's the first incident. The next incident I'm going to tell you was the night before my wedding. My wife was at her mother's for the night, as tradition calls for the husband not to see the bride before the wedding. So I was by myself. I kind of had a crummy bachelor party, so my friends and I decided we were going to hang out at my best man's place for the night and try to make up for it. I had some laundry in the dryer and was tidying up some last-minute things, waiting for it to finish. I remember hearing a child laughing, but there was something weird about it, and the way it sounded. It was still early in the afternoon, and an acceptable time for kids to still be out playing, but we don't have many, if any, kids in our neighborhood. But I digress. The laughing sounded echo-ish, I guess. I walked to the back window by the stairs to take a look, but as I got closer to the window, the laughing sounded like it was coming from the basement. This was fucked up. We have a guest bedroom right beside ours that's really just for my nephew to play in. It's filled with toys, games, and other kids' stuff, but it's usually vacant for the most part, and my wife and I have no real need to go in there any other time. I stood at the top of our narrow, steep staircase that led into the shadowed guest room door, and listened. The laughter was indeed coming from the guest room. My hesitation was noticeable. I even asked myself why I was scared. After a quick pep talk, I descended the stairs and made the few steps to the guest room entrance. As I grabbed the knob, the laughter stopped instantly. I paused for a second when it started again, but this time from upstairs. I quickly bolted up the stairs, through the kitchen, and darted into the living room. Quiet. I stood focused, listening, moving only my eyes in a predatory fashion. Something was definitely just in my house. About an hour passed, and I had almost forgot about the laughter, chalking it up to a child outside, somehow tripping me out. I went back downstairs to grab the laundry I was waiting for, passing the guest room door quickly, reminding me of the taunting laugh just moments before. I turned on the light above the washer and dryer, and began to gather up my clothes when I heard tink, 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 and looked up. The pull string to turn on the laundry room light was gently swinging against the exposed light bulb. I grabbed the tiny toy motorcycle attached to the bottom of the metallic string and stopped the swinging, wondering what caused it to do so in the first place. I bent down to finish gathering my laundry. All of a sudden, the pull string started rapidly swinging against the light bulb, as if something had smacked it. Hard. I jumped back, the sudden disturbance scaring the shit out of me. I just watched as the string eventually slowed. Once stopped, I grabbed my clothes and fled upstairs. I called one of my friends and asked if he minded picking me up earlier than the agreed upon time. I said I was getting restless and just wanted to go, too embarrassed to mention what just happened, out of fear of ridicule and teasing. I did eventually tell everyone about the incident, just after our wedding, of course. I have one more incident I'll share when I have time. The author of this story later shared an update. The update will now follow. This incident has to be the one that stands out as the most unusual. In fact, every time I'm in my kitchen alone, I think about it. It was early afternoon, and my wife decided to make us a snack. We decided on Rice Krispie Squares, as they're easy to make, and don't take very long. She prepared them without incident, put them in pans to cool, and covered them with plastic wrap. As we waited for the squares to cool, we were watching TV in the living room. We watched some old rerun, and figured by the time it was over, this should be the perfect eating temperature. The show ended, and after an arguable game of rock, paper, scissors, I graciously headed to the kitchen to cut us our snack. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen block and set it down on the counter beside the pans. I removed the plastic wrap and began to crumple it up to throw it in the trash. I turned around and took a few steps towards the garbage can when I heard the knife. It sounded like someone dropped it on the counter. I turned around, and the knife was now sitting on the other side of the pan. "What the fuck?" I said aloud. "What?" my wife asked, sounding concerned. I said, "The knife, it just, moved." As I moved towards the counter, my wife just gave me a look saying, "Are you convinced yet?" and went back to her show. At this point, so many weird and strange things had happened that a knife moving just wasn't that compelling. However, what happened next perplexes me to this day. As I went to cut the Rice Krispie squares, I noticed they were already cut. I backed away from the counter, just staring at the knife. I was looking for something, anything to explain what the fuck just happened. Whatever this thing is, just use the goddamn butcher's knife. My wife and I just stared at each other. "Should we still eat them?" I asked with uncertainty. She hesitated, then replied, "I don't know, do you still want to?" The caution in her voice, well received. I didn't answer right away. We just both stood there, looking at the pan of once delicious afternoon treats, now haunted. We decided not to, and went back into the living room. My wife sat on the couch, and I went to grab a DVD from our entertainment stand. Thinking a funny movie might change the now ominous tone. I made my selection, and as I walked away from the stand, all the DVDs just flew off the shelf, scattering the floor, and scaring the shit out of us. My wife called for our dogs. We quickly gathered a few things, and ran for the car, wanting nothing more than to just leave. We drove around, and ended up at a nearby field where the dogs could run, and we could collect ourselves. We decided to grab a burger, and over our meal we kept trying to find excuses not to go back home. Eventually we did, and when we got there things seemed quiet. In fact, that was the last incident for a few weeks, thankfully. Things still continue to happen in our place, but those incidents stand out for me. Honestly, I could write a book with all the weird things that have happened there. Hell, maybe I will. And maybe this house does indeed have a dark past. Here are a couple of stories from the house I lived in, from age 8 to 20. Attic Ghosts. From my preteen years through when I left the house, my room was in the attic, which had been converted into a bedroom. It was separated into 2 rooms, with the backmost part of the attic as a bedroom shared by my sister and I, and the front room had a little couch, TV, dressers, mirrors, and closets. There was a good amount of activity in those rooms. There would be footsteps, not floorboard creaks, but actual footsteps, from the other room whenever you were up there alone. There would be banging from inside the walls. Not pipes making noises, but what sounded like kicking from inside the walls, or even the closets. At night, there would always be whispering. I do realize that's a common thing to experience when you're starting to drift off to sleep. But I mean, if it was around midnight, and you were wide awake watching television in the front room, you can hear whispers coming from the bedroom. If you are on your bed reading, you can hear whispers from the front area. To clarify, it wasn't like this happened constantly for 10 years, more like it would flare up for a few weeks to a month at a time, and then it would subside, for a while, before picking up again. Radio and lights. The scariest memory I have was from a daylight encounter. I was trying on an outfit and watching myself in the mirror in the front room. From the bedroom, my radio suddenly went on. I looked around to see if I had stepped on the remote control or something. But as I glanced about, the volume went louder and louder and louder. I was starting to feel panicked, but I kept my cool. But when the radio station started changing around like crazy, is when I ran out of the room. I know for a fact that I turned the light off on my way out the room. I was actually very compulsive about this because they were also going from off to on, and it had become like second nature to flick it off on my way downstairs. I recruited my grandmother to come up to the attic with me to shut off the radio, which was still tuning through different stations at top volume. When we got to the top of the stairs, the radio stopped shifting stations, but stayed loud. We also panicked because every single drawer was open, all the closet doors were open, and all the lights were on. I slept downstairs for a few nights after that, until the activity subsided. Super Bowl Sunday this month. My husband and I decided to have a nerd party, where we brought over our friends and played video games and board games, instead of watching a football game none of us cared about. People stayed over until around 10 p.m, and then most left. All except my best friend, who I call Sissy, and my friend who has stayed over only twice before, Bailey. My husband went to bed, and the girls and I decided to watch Sweeney Todd again for like the 50th time, before going to bed. We ended the movie at around 2 a.m. I am taking my medicine, chronic pain warrior, to go to bed, and off in the corner in the dining room, I hear a faint clicking noise. I asked the girls if they hear it. At first they didn't, but they did a little after. I walk over there and try to figure out what was bumping up against what to make that noise. I didn't see anything moving, but I figured it was the blinds clicking together, and there wasn't anything we could do about that. I checked the light fixture above the dining table to make sure it wasn't moving, and that wasn't it either. I told the girls that the clicking will probably stop once the air turns off, and if it bothers them at night, to go into the guest room. As I'm talking, Bailey gasps. Sissy and I run toward the dining room, and lo and behold, the damn light bulb above the dining table is unscrewing itself from the light fixture. We all watched in shock as it falls to the table, doesn't break, and then rolls off into a chair, and then shatters. Now, light bulbs can be faulty, but I have never in my life seen a light bulb unscrew itself from a light fixture. Literally, the light bulb was turning as if someone was taking it out. Needless to say, that scared the shit out of all of us. Nothing ever happens in this house. This is something Sissy and I would expect from my parents' house. We all slept together that night, and I saged the area the next day. I will note a few things. The animals were freaking the hell out when this happened. I had to put them in the study because their eyes were darting around, and they went into hiding real quick. Bailey's parents' house is also extremely haunted. This happened when she was over, so it's possible whatever it was followed her. We aren't sure though, since the 2 other times she stayed over, nothing happened. She did go to bed earlier than me though. There was never any evil feeling right after that happened or right before when I was over there. I didn't feel anything except for when it happened. I don't know if the clicking was related. I couldn't outright see a cause of the clicking, and the light bulb and the light fixture were perfectly fine. I assumed it was the blinds clicking while the air was blowing, but I've never heard that noise since. Bailey insisted she can clean up the light bulb mess. I think she felt used to this kind of thing, so wanted to be the one to face it, even though she knows I grew up in a haunted house. Nothing has happened since then, thankfully. It has been like it normally is at my house, quiet and spook-free. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to True Paranormal Stories, Episode 5. I'm starting to make some headway with that little project I mentioned the other day. Got a good chunk of stories right now. I've already started recording them. So fingers crossed I might have it up next week. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I don't want to ramble on too much of this video, so thank you very much for listening. And take very good care of yourselves.